Hey guys, Dan Gray, John Candelier here for the Pro Swing Instructional Network. What we're going to discuss today is another important aspect of the hitting process. We believe that strong, solid, successful hitters are built from the ground up. So we have and will continue in our videos to emphasize the lower half movements. But today, we're going to discuss our hands. I have a lot of parents, a lot of coaches, a lot of players that want to talk about where the hands need to settle in, how we need to start them in their setup, and what we need to do to get them in a position of strength to allow them to do what they want to do through the hitting zone once our body puts them in a position to do what they need to do. So the things we're going to talk about today are the when, where, and how to get our hands from the setup position to what we call the launch position. Now the important part is going to be when we get to that launch position. Everybody will tell you that they start kind of differently. And part of that is in what's called the pre-swing rhythm. We don't want our hitters to be stationary, waiting and waiting and waiting, because the more still you are, the more tense you become. Everything should stay relaxed and fluid. So what we're going to try to talk about is from where your hitter sets up, when, where, and how we want them to get back to that strong launch position to again allow them to be in a great power slot coming back to the hitting zone and being able to maximize the bat speed and the time in the hitting zone to really create maximum ball exit velocity. So Coach John's going to go in his setup. And the first thing that I want to talk to you guys about is let's talk about grip. I get a lot of questions about grip. As you can see, one of the very simple tests that we use with the young hitters, you can see John's fingers are pointed in the same direction. Some coaches at the younger levels talk about the door knocking knuckles being lined up. But really, if you can have your hitters have those fingers somewhat in the same direction, you know that the hands aren't being wrapped if that's the case, and we know that the wrist will be in a strong position when those fingers are lined up in the same direction. If those fingers are not lined up and the hands become wrapped, then our wrists become much weaker and the connection to our rest of our body becomes a little bit more diminished. So the other thing that you can see in John's grip is that it's not what's called the death grip. He's got a nice, relaxed, loose grip, and he'll start to feel that as you can see him start to try to move early in what's called, as we said earlier, the pre-swing rhythm. So we've got Coach John in his setup position with his hands. Again, as you can see, he's relaxed. He's got a little rhythm and tempo in his pro swing rhythm. And what we're going to talk about now is when he's going to get those hands starting to go in a good launch position to, again, put him in a position of athleticism and strength to fly through and to and through the hitting zone. So what we want to do with the when is make sure that the movements going to his launch position are based off of his front foot movement. They're working together. So as you see Coach John do it a few times, you can see that the hands aren't moving independently of the front foot movement. They're moving together. And that's the key. We don't want those hands moving prior. We don't want the foot getting down and then the hands moving. We want to try to connect that movement so that when his foot gets down, those hands are getting to the strong launch position. Lastly, we want to talk about how Coach John is going to get those hands into a strong launch position. So again, you see Coach John in his pre-swing rhythm, and I want you guys to watch how he's going to get his hands back into that strong position. Now, let's notice a couple of things when Coach John does that. Let's look at the angle of the barrel. He's in a very strong barrel position behind his head with the barrel and the weight of the bat behind his hands. Notice how we have the knob of the bat facing a little bit more towards the catcher. Now, Coach John doesn't start that way in his pre-swing rhythm, but again, as his foot lands, we want to make sure that we have the bat head behind the hands with the knob facing a little bit more towards the catcher behind you, so that when it's go time, those hands, starting with the guide hand and then the power hand, is going to allow the buggy whip action or the bat whip to create good action to and through the zone. That's a very strong position, again, for the hands to be in to allow maximum performance to and through the hitting zone. Here's a couple of common mistakes that we believe that young hitters make that we see on a daily basis as far as how they're trying to get their hands in a strong launch position. The first one Coach John is going to show you from his pre-swing rhythm is what we call getting his hands vertical and getting the bat head above his hands instead of behind his hands. So Coach John is going to show you one of the things we're trying to avoid when we get to that launch position. So as we can see, the bat head is no longer behind, in a strong position behind his hands and behind his head. It's now over his hands. Again, with the weight of the bat being over your hands, it becomes very difficult to try to keep a short, tight, connected path to and through contact when the weight of the bat is above your hands. Again, the optimal position is to have the weight of the bat behind your hands, not above your hands. Another common mistake that young hitters make on how to try to get their hands getting back to a strong launch position, John will show you, again, he's in his pre-swing rhythm, is when John starts to move, what you're going to see is that his hands off of his front foot movement are taking the bat. Go ahead, Coach John. And now this collapse from the power arm, the knob never gets back towards the catcher. The barrel starts to fade down and back. And again, what this is going to cause is a weak power arm, causing our guide arm to have to do more work pulling across the hitting zone and taking the barrel of the bat and dragging it, not in an optimum launch angle, but steeper, and then pulling it across the hitting zone. So that's why we don't want to try to get collapse back here with the barrel down here. Again, we're trying to keep that barrel strong behind our head, behind our hands, so as the rotational force movement works, those hands can stay tight and connected, whipping the bat towards the hitting zone. Lastly, we'd like to give you a couple of drills to work on the when, where, and how to get your hands going from your pre-swing rhythm and setup to a strong launch position. The first drill we're going to talk about doesn't even involve a ball or anybody else, but you as the hitter. We'd like to, if we could, have a mirror in front of us so that we can actually visualize ourselves, either the mirror on the side or in front of us, so we're watching ourselves go into that separation or trigger, whatever you would like to call it, to get us to that strong position. So John's going to show us connecting the front foot to the hand movement to the launch position. And he's just going to keep repeating that, making sure that he feels connected and strong with his hands once he gets his front foot down. Again, we'd like to have a mirror in front of us to make sure that we can see where our hands are, where our barrel is, to avoid some of the common mistakes of making sure our hands don't wrap, making sure our hands don't get away from us, making sure that the barrel doesn't get over our hands but is behind our hands, and again, making sure we're somewhere at the top of the shoulder, off the back of the shoulder. The second drill is simply our take drill, and what that means is when you're working with a teammate, a coach, a parent, whether you're doing T work, front toss work, or BP, basically on any of your takes, you're basically monitoring where you are. Again, with the where, when, and how you're moving your hands into the launch position. So again, John is going to go into that strong launch position with his hands based off of the front foot movement, making sure that we get those hands in a strong position. Whether it's the T, front toss, or BP, you should monitor yourself on the takes and make sure that you're getting into that strong position. Through the reps, you'll get consistent in being in that launch position that you want to be when it's go time. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed our video today on hand placement and how to get your hands in a strong launch position. Remember, practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. So create good practice habits that translate into quality, consistent game situation swings for more success on the field. We'll see you next time on the Pro Swing Instructional Network.